The massive Galactic Academy station stretched across the void like a glittering metal city, its countless windows reflecting the light of 3 distant suns. Ships from dozens of worlds docked at its ports every hour, bringing students whose species had never even heard of each other until the Great Alliance formed 50 years ago. The station's corridors buzzed with conversations in languages that sounded like music, static, or roaring winds. Minji walked quietly through the main academic wing, her worn leather satchel slung over one shoulder. And like the flashy uniforms worn by students from wealthier worlds, she kept things simple with basic academy-issued clothes and scuffed boots that had seen better days. Her black hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she moved with the kind of purposeful stride that said she had places to be and work to do. The xenobiology lab was her sanctuary. While other students gossiped in the recreation areas or showed off their latest tech gadgets, Minji preferred the quiet hum of the research wing. Today she was cataloging samples from Kepler to B, a world where plants grew in spirals and changed colors based on the emotional state of nearby creatures. The work required patience and careful observation, 2 things humans seemed to excel at despite what other species thought about their supposed impulsiveness. Professor Julian, an elderly centaurian with 6 arms and kind golden eyes, often praised Minji's dedication. "You have the focus of a deep space navigator," he would tell her, which was high praise coming from a species known for their precision and attention to detail. What the professor didn't know was that Minji's grandfather had taught her that focus through old Earth movies watched late at night. Stories about underdogs who never gave up no matter how hard life hit them. The trouble started 3 levels down in the station's low decks, where the less regulated areas housed everything from cargo holds to student recreation zones. This was Taeyon's domain. Standing nearly 8 feet tall with shoulders broad enough to block a doorway, the Centaurian had skin like armored scales and eyes that glowed faintly red when he was angry, which was often. His species came from a world where only the strongest survived, and they brought that mentality wherever they went. Centaurians were impressive warriors, but they had a weakness for assuming that physical strength was the only kind that mattered. This blind spot had gotten them into trouble with humans before. Though most of the galaxy had forgotten those old conflicts, Taeyon certainly had. Which was why he felt comfortable using his size to get what he wanted from smaller species. His gang consisted of 3 other students who followed him round like moons orbiting a planet. There was Kexon, a nervous reptilian who handled the technical side of their operation, stealing homework files and test answers from the Academy's databases. Dongwu was a hulking crystalline being whose rocky exterior made him nearly indestructible in a fight. The 3rd member, Hayek, came from a gaseous species that could partially phase through solid matter, making him perfect for sneaking into restricted areas. Together, they had created a thriving business based on fear and intimidation. Smaller students paid them to complete assignments. Larger ones paid them for protection, and everyone else simply stayed out of their way. The Academy's security force was spread thin across such a massive station, and the lower decks were notorious for having blind spots in their surveillance network. When Minji had politely declined Taeyeon's offer to complete his quantum physics assignment in exchange for protection money, she had unknowingly declared war on the station's most dangerous gang. The Centaurian had been so surprised by her calm refusal that he had actually walked away that first time. But now his reputation was on the line. If word got out that a human girl had said no to him without consequences, his entire operation would crumble. The corridor where they finally confronted each other was one of the busier passages connecting academic wings to the residential areas. Students from a dozen different species were heading to their evening meals or late classes, creating the perfect audience for what Tian intended to be a public demonstration of his power. The various alien students recognized the tension. Immediately, a group of blue-skinned Aquarians pressed themselves against the walls, their gill slits fluttering nervously. Several insectoid hive minds clustered together, their collective consciousness buzzing with concern. Even a pair of energy beings dimmed their natural glow, as if trying to make themselves invisible. The confrontation was like watching a moon challenge a star. Minji barely reached Taeyeon's chest, and her slight human frame looked fragile next to his armored bulk. But there was something in the way she stood, feet planted firmly and shoulders squared, that suggested she was not planning to run. Her dark eyes met his glowing red ones without flinching, and when she spoke, her voice carried clearly through the corridor despite its quiet tone. This was the moment that would change everything at the Galactic Academy station, though none of the watching students realized it yet. The small vegan student's name was Jinwoo, and he was having the worst day of his academic career. His species was known throughout the galaxy for their peaceful nature and incredible intelligence. But physically, they were about as intimidating as a flower petal, standing barely 4 feet tall with delicate blue skin that seemed to glow softly in the station's artificial lighting. Jinwoo looked like he might blow away in a strong breeze. He had been rushing to submit his advanced mathematics project when Taeyeon's gang cornered him near the transport tubes. The Zentarian had heard that vegans were mathematical geniuses, and he wanted Jinwoo to solve a complex engineering problem that was worth half his grade. When the small alien politely explained that helping would violate the Academy's honor code, Taeyeon had grabbed the data pad and thrown it across the corridor. The device shattered against the metal wall, scattering holographic displays and memory chips across the floor like digital confetti. Months of work vanished in an instant. Jinwoo dropped to his knees, frantically trying to salvage what he could while tears of frustration rolled down his blue cheeks. His trembling hands could barely hold the broken pieces. That was when Minji appeared. She had been returning from the upper deck laboratories when she heard the commotion. The corridor was packed with students, but they were all pressed against the walls like they were watching a natural disaster unfold. In the center of it all stood Taeyeon, his massive frame blocking out the overhead lights as he loomed over the crying vegan student. Without hesitation, Minji pushed through the crowd and knelt beside Jinwoo. Her movements were calm and methodical as she began collecting the scattered components, sorting them by type and checking each piece for damage. The small alien looked up at her with wide, grateful eyes that reflected the corridor's blue emergency lighting. "Some of these memory cores are still intact," she said softly, placing the salvageable pieces into Jinwoo's trembling hands. "The main processor looks undamaged too. You might be able to recover most of your work." Taeyeon watched this display of kindness with growing irritation. His gang had gathered behind him, forming a wall of intimidating alien muscle. Kexin's reptilian eyes darted nervously between the crowd and the security cameras, calculating whether they were being recorded. Dongwoo's crystalline body creaked ominously as he shifted his weight, tiny fragments of rock falling from his joints. Hayek had partially phased through the wall, his gaseous form rippling with anticipation. "Nobody asked you to interfere, human." Taeyeon snarled, his voice carrying the kind of menace that had sent entire star systems scrambling for peace treaties. His massive fists clenched so tightly that his knuckles made sounds like grinding stone. The watching crowd held its collective breath. Students from dozens of worlds had heard stories about what happened when Zentarians lost their temper. Their home world was a brutal place where volcanic eruptions were considered mild weather, and their people had evolved to match that harsh environment. When they fought, Buildings got demolished and opponents ended up in medical bays for weeks. Minji helped Jinwoo to his feet, making sure he had a secure grip on his recovered data before she turned to face the towering Zentarian. The size difference was almost comical. She barely reached his chest, and her human frame looked delicate next to his armored bulk. But there was something in her posture that suggested she was not planning to back down. Someone should she replied simply, her voice carrying clearly through the corridor despite its quiet tone. The words hit Taeyeon like a physical slap. In his culture, backing down from a challenge was the ultimate humiliation. His species had conquered 3-star systems through sheer determination and refusal to retreat. And now this small human was questioning his authority in front of dozens of witnesses. His red eyes flared brighter, casting crimson shadows on the walls. The temperature in the corridor seemed to rise as his body heat increased, a biological response that had evolved to intimidate predators on his volcanic homeworld. Several of the watching students took involuntary steps backward, their survival instincts screaming warnings. But Minji stood her ground. The strike came faster than most species could track. Taeyeon's hand moved like a piston, powered by muscles that could crush steel. The sound of impact echoed through the corridor like a thunderclap, loud enough to trigger the station's acoustic sensors 3 levels away. The force was sufficient to knock out a crystalline warrior or send a reptilian flying across the room. Minji stumbled backward, her head snapping to the side from the impact. A thin line of blood appeared at the corner of her mouth, bright red against her pale skin. For a moment, the corridor was completely silent except for the gentle hum of the station's life support systems. Then something extraordinary happened instead of falling or crying out like every other species would have done. Minji slowly straightened. She raised one hand to her lip, wiping away the trickle of blood with movements that were calm and deliberate. When she looked up at Taeyeon again, something fundamental had changed in her expression. The fire that burned in her dark eyes was not the rage of an animal or the fury of a warrior. It was something deeper and more dangerous, something that had been passed down through generations of humans who had refused to quit when the odds were impossible. It was the same flame that had driven her species from a single world to the stars, the same determination that had made them legends across the galaxy. Even Taeyeon, for all his size and strength, felt a chill run down his spine. "Big mistake," she said quietly, and her words carried the weight of prophecy. The Academy's security system captured everything in crystal clear detail. 17 different camera angles recorded the confrontation, from the initial argument to the moment Taeyeon's, and connected with Minji's face. The footage automatically uploaded to the station's central network, where it sat in a routine incident file waiting for review. But Academy students were curious by nature, and word of a fight always traveled fast. Seojun was a third-year computer science student from the Andromedan colonies, known for his skill at bypassing digital security systems. He had been 3 corridors away when the confrontation happened. But by evening he had accessed the footage through a back door in the Academy's network. What started as casual curiosity turned into something much bigger when he decided to run facial recognition on the human girl. The Galactic database was a massive collection of information from thousands of worlds, containing everything from genetic records to historical archives. Most students used it for research projects, but Seojun had modified his access to dig deeper than usual. When he uploaded Minji's image, he expected to find basic Academy enrollment information. Instead, the system exploded with matches. The first result made him blink in confusion. Then the second result made him sit up straighter. By the third result, he was calling his roommate over to look at the screen. Within minutes, Half the dormitory had crowded into his small quarters, staring at the holographic displays. Floating above his desk, Minji Stallone, granddaughter of Sylvester Stallone, the legendary Earth warrior whose name was known across every inhabited world in the galaxy. The story of how Stallone's films had spread throughout the cosmos was itself legendary. When humanity first made contact with alien civilizations, cultural exchange programs became essential for building trust between species. Earth's entertainment archives were among the first things shared, and somehow Stallone's movies had resonated with beings who had never even seen a human before. The themes were universal. An underdog facing impossible odds. Someone who refused to give up no matter how many times they got knocked down. Stories of determination, courage, and the power of the human spirit to overcome any obstacle. Species across the galaxy found inspiration in these tales, and soon Stallone's films were being studied in alien universities as examples of human psychology and determination. On the water world of Aquarius Prime, young swimmers trained to the rhythm of his training montages. The warrior clans of Rigel 7 had adopted his quotes as battle cries. Even the peaceful meditation masters of the Crystal Nebula used his films to teach lessons about inner strength and perseverance. But it went deeper than entertainment. Military academies throughout the galaxy analyzed his characters' fighting techniques. Psychologists studied the mental toughness displayed in his performances. Historians debated whether these films were accurate representations of human behavior or idealized fiction. But most concluded that the determination shown on screen reflected real human characteristics. The name Stallone had become synonymous with never giving up, with fighting until the very end no matter how hopeless things seemed. It was whispered with reverence in a dozen languages, from the clicking sounds of the insectoid hives to the musical tones of the gas giant singers. And now everyone at the academy knew that the quiet girl who had been studying alien plants was carrying that legendary bloodline. The news spread through the station's communication networks like wildfire. Students abandoned their evening meals to crowd around holographic displays, watching the security footage over and over. The academy's social channels exploded with commentary in hundreds of languages. News drones from galactic media corporations began requesting permission to dock at the station. Taeyeon was in his quarters on the lower deck when Kexin burst through the door, his reptilian features pale with panic. "You need to see this," the smaller alien hissed, projecting a hologram from his portable device. The Zenturian laughed when he saw the genealogy reports floating in the air above them. "A dead human actor. This is supposed to frighten me." His voice carried the same arrogant confidence that had intimidated students for months. "What's he going to do? Come back from the grave to make another movie?" But his laughter died abruptly when his personal communicator activated with the distinctive tone that meant an emergency message from his homeworld. The holographic image that appeared showed the weathered face of Elder Vorthik, the most senior member of the Zentorian High Council. The old warrior's scarred features were twisted with an expression that Taeyeon had never seen before. Genuine fear. "You fool," the elder's voice crackled through subspace static. "Do you have any idea what you have done?" The conversation that followed was conducted in the harsh, guttural language of Zentaurus Prime, but Kexin could understand enough to catch the general meaning. The elder explained that striking a Stallone descendant unprovoked was considered an act of cosmic stupidity by any species with half a brain. Humans were deceptive in their apparent weakness, and those carrying the Stallone bloodline were especially dangerous when cornered. The elder's words painted a picture that shattered Taeyeon's confidence. He learned about the border wars of 2387, when a single human battalion had held off an entire Zenturian fleet for 3 months through sheer determination. He heard about the siege of Kepler Station, where human defenders had continued fighting even after their life support systems failed. Story after story of humans who had faced impossible odds and somehow found a way to win. The humans have a saying. Ildevorthik continued, his ancient voice heavy with warning. Never corner a creature that has nothing left to lose, and you, young fool, have just cornered a descendant of the greatest warrior. The communication ended, leaving Taeyeon staring at the empty space where the hologram had been. Round the station, legal experts were already pulling up the galactic honor codes, confirming what everyone suspected. Under interspecies law, Minji had the right to formal combat. She could challenge her attacker to single combat, and by galactic tradition, he would have to accept or face exile from civilized space. The damage was done within hours. The entire galaxy would know that a Zenturian bully had struck a Stallone without provocation. Betting pools were already opening on remote worlds, and military observers from a dozen species were requesting permission to witness the combat. Taeyeon had wanted to make an example of a quiet human girl. Instead, he had awakened something that would make him famous across the galaxy for all the wrong reasons. News exploded across the galaxy, faster than light-speed communications could carry it. Within 6 hours, every major news network from the core worlds to the outer rim had picked up the story. Holographic headlines blazed across space stations and planetary surfaces in hundreds of languages. Stallone descendant challenges. Zenturian bully and academy fight becomes galactic sensation. On the gambling world of Nexus 7, the betting pools opened with odds heavily favoring Taeyeon due to his size and species advantages. But as more information about human combat capabilities leaked out, those odds began shifting dramatically. Professional gamblers who had studied interspecies conflicts were quietly placing massive bets on the human girl, remembering old wars where size hadn't mattered as much as determination. The Galactic Council's emergency session was called when representatives from 12 different species demanded official observers be sent to witness the combat. What had started as a school disciplinary matter was now being treated as a diplomatic event with potential consequences for interspecies relations across the galaxy. Minji found herself at the center of a storm she had never wanted. News drones buzzed outside her dormitory windows like mechanical insects, their cameras trying to capture any glimpse of the legendary granddaughter. She had to take alternate routes through the station's maintenance tunnels just to reach the gymnasium without being mobbed by reporters and curious students. The Academy's main gymnasium became her sanctuary during the late-night hours when most students were asleep. The vast space was equipped with training equipment designed for dozens of different species, from gravity simulators to atmospheric processors that could replicate the conditions of any known world. And the center set a regulation combat ring, used for interspecies martial arts competitions. At 2 a.m. station time, when the corridors were empty and the only sounds were the gentle hum of life support systems, Minji would slip into the gym and begin her preparation. She started each session with a long run around the gymnasium's elevated track, her footsteps echoing in the darkness while holographic displays tracked her pace and heart rate. Ji-hoon found her there on the third night, running laps with the mechanical precision of a training droid. He was a senior student from the Military Academy's officer program, built like a compact tank with the kind of quiet confidence that came from real combat experience. His family had served in the human colonial marines for 3 generations, and he recognized the look in Minji's eyes as she ran. "You're training wrong," he said simply. Stepping onto the track beside her, Minji slowed to a stop, wiping sweat from her forehead. "What do you mean? You're training like you're trying to match his strength," Ji-hoon explained, gesturing toward the heavyweight equipment designed for larger species. "That's not how humans win fights. We win by being smarter, faster, and more stubborn than anyone else. Over the following nights, Ji-hoon shared lessons learned from actual combat zones. He taught her how to use an opponent's size against them, how to strike at weak points that existed on every species, and most importantly, how to keep fighting when everything in her body screamed at her to quit. So Young joined them on the fifth night, bringing medical supplies and nutritional supplements designed for human physiology. She was the Academy's champion in zero-gravity athletics, a sport that required incredible body control and mental toughness. Her lean frame was deceptively strong, and she moved with the fluid grace of someone who had spent years perfecting every muscle movement. The key is endurance, she explained while helping Minji practice combat forms. Other species might be stronger or faster, but humans can outlast almost anyone. We evolved as persistence hunters, chasing prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. That's your advantage. Word of the training session spread quietly through the human student population. They began showing up in small groups, offering advice and encouragement without making a big scene. There was Minho, the engineering student who explained the mechanical principles behind effective striking techniques. Yuna from the medical program shared knowledge about alien anatomy and vulnerable points. Even Quiet Doyen from the philosophy department contributed by teaching meditation techniques for maintaining focus under extreme stress. What they were doing was technically against Academy regulations. Students weren't supposed to interfere in formal combat challenges, and certainly weren't allowed to provide tactical assistance. But there was an unspoken understanding among the humans that this fight had become about more than just Minji's personal honor. It was about proving that their species belonged among the stars, that Earth's children could stand toe-to-toe with any alien warrior. Meanwhile, 3 levels down in the station's low quarters, Taeyeon's world was falling apart. The combat records that Kexon had pulled from the Galactic military database painted a terrifying picture of human warfare capabilities. What his species had always interpreted as weakness was actually restraint of the most dangerous kind. The files showed human soldiers continuing to fight with broken bones and internal injuries that would have killed most aliens. Stories of human pilots ramming their damaged ships into enemy vessels rather than surrender. Accounts of human ground troops holding defensive positions against overwhelming odds until their ammunition and ran out, then switching to hand-to-hand combat with improvised weapons. Most disturbing of all were the psychological profiles. Humans didn't just fight to win, they fought to survive, and when their survival was threatened, they became something that even the galaxy's most dangerous predator species learned to fear. The final blow came when his family's communication arrived from Zentaris Prime. The holographic message showed his father, a decorated military commander, formally severing all ties with his son. The shame of striking an unprepared opponent, especially one from a species known for their combat prowess, had brought dishonor to their entire bloodline. News crews from across the galaxy had begun arriving at the Academy, their ships filling the station's docking bays. The combat arena was booked solid for the event, with viewing rights being sold to networks on hundreds of worlds. What had started as a simple disciplinary matter had become the most watched sporting event in galactic history. In the quiet hours before dawn, while the galaxy held its breath in anticipation, Minji continued training. Each movement was deliberate, each technique practiced until it became instinct. She was no longer just a xenobiology student preparing for a fight. She was carrying the hopes and pride of her entire species, and she would not let them down. The arena was booked, the galaxy was watching, and somewhere in the depths of space, the spirit of her grandfather seemed to whisper words of encouragement. It ain't about how hard you hit. It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. The Academy's central arena had never seen anything like this before. The massive circular chamber, designed to accommodate sporting events for dozens of different species, was packed beyond capacity. Students hung from the upper galleries like colorful clusters of fruit, while faculty members occupied the premium viewing boxes with their alien dignitaries and special guests. The arena floor itself was a marvel of engineering, capable of adjusting its gravity, atmosphere, and even trained to match the needs of any competition. Today, it was set to standard galactic parameters, Earth normal gravity, standard atmospheric mix, and a simple flat surface marked with the traditional combat circle above the arena. Massive holographic displays showed camera feeds from every angle, broadcasting the event live to over 3 billion viewers across the galaxy. News anchors from hundreds of worlds provided commentary in their native languages. From the musical tones of the songbird nebula to the clicking sounds of the hive worlds dot in the preparation chambers beneath the arena, Minji sat quietly on a simple metal bench, her hands wrapped in protective tape. She wore the standard Academy combat uniform, a simple grey outfit that seemed almost laughably plain compared to the ornate ceremonial armor that Taeyeon had chosen. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her face showed the kind of calm focus that came from weeks of intense preparation. Ji-hoon stood beside her, offering last-minute advice. "Remember what we practiced. He's going to try to end this quickly with his superior reach and strength. Don't let him dictate the pace of the fight." Seon checked Minji's equipment one final time, making sure everything was secure. "The medical team is standing by, but don't rely on them. Fight like your life depends on it, because in a way, it does." When the call came, Minji walked through the tunnel that led to the arena floor. The roar of the crowd hit her like a physical wall of sound. Thousands of voices cheering in languages she had never heard before. The arena's lighting was brilliant, designed to ensure perfect visibility for the cameras and spectators. Taeyeon entered from the opposite tunnel, and the size difference was immediately obvious to everyone watching. The Zentarian stood nearly 8 feet tall, his grayscale skin gleaming under the arena lights. His ceremonial armor was decorated with the victory symbols of his home world, and he moved with the confident swagger of someone who had never lost a physical confrontation. The referee was a neutrally eye construct, a shimmering holographic figure that spoke in a voice translated simultaneously into every language represented in the audience. "Combatants, you are fighting under Galactic Honor Code Regulation 7.3. Combat continues until one participant yields, is rendered unconscious, or is unable to continue. Medical intervention is available but must be formally requested. Do you both understand these terms?" Both fighters nodded, and the crowd fell silent with anticipation. The first round began with Taeyeon doing exactly what everyone expected. He charged forward like a living battering ram, intending to use his superior size and strength to end the fight quickly. His massive fist swung toward Minji's head with enough force to crack stone. But Minji wasn't there when the punch arrived. She had slipped to the side at the last second, using the momentum from his charge to throw him off balance. It was a technique that Ji-hoon had drilled into her during countless practice sessions, turning an opponent's strength into a weakness. Taeyeon recovered quickly, his combat training from the Zentarian military academies taking over. He began a systematic assault, throwing combinations of punches and kicks designed to corner his smaller opponent. Several of his strikes connected, sending Minji stumbling backward with impacts that would have knocked out most species. But she kept getting back up every time Taeyeon thought he had her finished. The human girl would rise again, wiping blood from her mouth and settling back into her fighting stance. Her grandfather's legendary determination seemed to flow through her veins. refusing to let her body quit even when every rational thought screamed at her to stay down. The crowd began to murmur in amazement as the fight continued. What they were witnessing went against everything they thought they knew about human physical capabilities. Minji was absorbing punishment that should have ended the fight in the first round. But she kept coming forward with the relentless persistence of a natural disaster. By the fourth round, Taeyeon's confidence began to crack. His strikes were still powerful, but they were becoming less precise as exhaustion set in. The Zentaurian fighting style relied on overwhelming opponents quickly, not on prolonged combat. His species had evolved for short, decisive battles, not the kind of endurance contest that this was becoming. Minji, meanwhile, was fighting exactly the kind of battle that humans had evolved for. She was pacing herself, conserving energy while slowly wearing down her larger opponent. Each round, she moved a little faster, struck a little more precisely, and showed a little more of the tactical intelligence that had made humanity dangerous throughout the galaxy. The turning point came in the seventh round. Taeyeon, exhausted and frustrated by his inability to finish the fight, abandoned his careful technique and made a desperate all-out charge. It was exactly the kind of mistake that Minji had been waiting for. She sidestepped at the last possible moment, using his own momentum against him. As he stumbled past, she delivered a precise strike to a pressure point that Yuna had taught her about, a spot where the Zentaurian nervous system was particularly vulnerable. The massive alien crashed to the arena floor like a falling tree, his body betraying him at the worst possible moment. He tried to rise, his muscles straining against the neural disruption, but his legs wouldn't support his weight. After several attempts, he collapsed back to the floor, unable to continue. The arena erupted in chaos. Students from dozens of species leaped to their feet, cheering in languages that created a symphony of celebration. The holographic displays showed the moment of victory from every possible angle, and across the galaxy, viewing parties exploded in excitement. Minji stood over her fallen opponent. Bloodied but victorious, her uniform was torn, her face was bruised, and she was breathing heavily from the exertion. But she was standing, and that was what mattered. The referee's holographic form materialized beside her, raising her hand in victory. The winner, by technical knockout, Minji Stallone Granddaughter. A microphone descended from the arena's ceiling, and Minji's voice carried across the galaxy to billions of listeners. "Humans don't look for fights," she said, her words steady despite her exhaustion. "But when someone forces one on us, we remember who we are." The Academy erupted in celebration that lasted for hours. Across the galaxy, human standing rose another notch in the complex web of interspecies relations, and Minji Stallone, the quiet xenobiology student who had just wanted to study alien plants, finally embraced both her heritage and her future as a symbol of human determination. The end.